Good afternoon, everyone. House Taxation Committee will be called to order. First item would be requests for bill introductions. Do we have any new requests at this time? Seeing none, we will move on to our first item of the day, and that is a hearing on House Bill 2421. And I'll turn first to the revisor's office for an overview of that bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2421 would provide countywide sales tax authority for Grant County, which would be up to an additional 1%. This would be on top of the regular 1% that counties have of general purpose sales tax authority. And this additional 1% would be for the purpose of financing the construction or remodeling of a courthouse, jail, law enforcement center facility, or other county administrative facility. This additional taxing authority would expire when the sales tax sufficient to pay all the costs incurred in the financing of such facility has been collected by retailers as determined by the Secretary of Revenue. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Adam. I'm just trying to pull up the bill here. Is this on publication in the register, or is this just upon, is it July 1st, or when does it take effect?
The bill would take effect, the statute books are July 1.
July 1st, okay. Committee, any questions? Representative Corbett.
Normally, they kind of have some idea of when their project might be done. That's kind of open-ended, kind of like the turnpike. It never gets done. Is there a time limit? Is there a time limit on this sales tax?
On this particular one, this was essentially what in this case, this was the provision that got inserted into for Grant County follows along the line of multiple other counties. This was one of the earlier provisions under the statute granting additional sales tax authority. You're right. Recent ones generally have either a 10, 15-year time frame. This one just states it will expire when the sales tax collected have been sufficient to pay the costs incurred. So that's the only time frame that's specified in this bill.
Thank you.
Further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you, Adam. Again, on the fiscal note on this, there's not much. Did anybody have any questions for Kathleen to address on the fiscal note? Otherwise, we will move on to proponent section testimony. Seeing none, we will go ahead and open up the proponent testimony and welcome first to committee, former Representative Marty Long. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members. It's great to be back in the building today and see a lot of faces that I haven't seen for a while. So, my name is Marty Long. I am the chairman of the Grant County Commissioners. I'm here on behalf of the commissioners today to talk about a project that we are contemplating, and that is building a new jail. Our jail was built in 1971. And it has become old and dilapidated. It also is the largest liability insurance exposure for the county. It is not ADA compliant. There's a lot of problems with plumbing, electrical, HVAC. You can imagine from a 1970 building. Also, the building was built in an era with few inmates that were held for serious crimes. So our jail constitutes more of a dorm style setting with many inmates sitting together. And we do not have the ability to segregate bad guys from not so bad guys. And we also cannot segregate women. So we've got some problems that we're trying to fix. And how we're wanting to do that is pass a bond issue this fall on a ballot for X amount of dollars. We still have architects working up those cost estimates right now. But the commissioners have also considered to pay for that bond instead of the historical ad valorem tax. We have contemplated placing a 1% sales tax on the ballot with the bond issue. Both questions to appear on the ballot. the 1%, Kansas Department of Revenues tells us that 1% would raise about $1 million in Grant County, approximately. It would sunset after the cost of the project were paid for. And so we think maybe it's time to defer from property tax on this project and look more forward to sales tax if you give us the authority to do that. And so that is about all my remarks. Unless you have some questions, I'd be ready to stand for questions.
I just have one question. Do you enjoy being a county commissioner more than a state representative?
I don't know whether it's a demotion or a promotion, but I do enjoy it. Yeah.
The feeling's mutual. Committee, are there any questions for Mr. Long? Representative Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, what is your current sales tax rate in Grant County?
Grant County does not have a sales tax. The city has a 2% sales tax, but the county of Grant has never had a sales tax and never had the authority to have one either.
Okay, so within the city limits, they're paying 8.5% right now,
That's correct.
and outside the city limits, 6.5%.
That's correct.
Okay. And then, how much money do you anticipate you need for the you said it raised about $1 million a year, if I understood you right, from the sales tax?
The sales tax estimated to bring us in about 1.1 million. We're hoping to pass a bond for about, don't have those cost estimates yet, but we're thinking a 40-bed unit might run us 10 to 12 million. Financed on a 15-year bond, 1.1 should take care of that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Representative Corbett.
He answered my question, 40-bed unit.
Any further questions, committee? Marty traveled a long way. This is your chance to ask him. Well, I just recognize, this is, we can get into the weeds on your project of the bill, but ultimately this is up to the voters. Our change in statute here is just to give the county the authority to put that question before the voters, and they're ultimately the ones that make this decision. So
That's correct. If you give us the authority, it's up to us to go home and sell the idea. Yeah.
All right. Seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
We also have written testimony from Jay Hall. Is there anyone else wishing to appear as a proponent on House Bill 2421? Seeing none, we have no neutral or opposing testimony. Is there anyone else wishing to appear either as neutral or opposing on House Bill 2421? Seeing none, we will close the hearing and move on to our next item of business for the day, and that is a hearing on House Bill 2434. And I would turn first again to the revisor's office for an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2434 would amend how tax revenues are credited from wagers on historical horse races. Of the current 3% tax that is levied on such wagers, the revenue would be credited to 1/3 of such revenue to the Kansas Horse Breeding Development Fund, and the remaining 2/3 to the Horse Fair Racing Benefit Fund. If you see under my testimony, I copied each kind of the relevant portions of these funds and how that money is dedicated pursuant to those funds. With that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you. Committee, are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for that. Next, we would turn to Department of Revenue for an overview on the fiscal note.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Kathleen Smith with the Department of Revenue. This does not affect the Department of Revenue. It is the Kansas Racing and Gaming Commission that has provided the fiscal impact. And so I would probably defer to them if that's all right.
Yes, thank you. Okay. At this time, we will open up our proponent section testimony and welcome first committee, Representative Droege. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Chairman Smith, excuse me about my voice. It's coming back, though. You've heard that this bill is not going to cost the state anything. It's fairly simple to add an addition to the existing record, the existing bill. And I'm in favor of this bill because horse racing has been a part of Kansas history since the 1800s. And this bill would refresh the horse racing industry in this state and bring much needed money to rural Kansas. The bill would bolster horse racing in production in Kansas, and it would come at no cost to the state. This would enable a multi-million-dollar industry to increase jobs, both direct and ancillary, and circulate money to rural Kansas. It's an amendment to KSA 2022 Supplement 78823. It would tax the game of historic racing, horse racing, at the future Wichita facility. This bill would be a tax of 1% on the machines and that go to the, and 2%, 3% on the machines, 2% go to the horse racing fair fund and 1% to the horseman's fund. And it's distributed under the instruction of the Kansas Racing and Gaming Commission. I urge you to support this bill. My hometown of Eureka would benefit greatly. It's been a big part of the whole life and culture of Eureka, Kansas since 1873 when we ran our first horse race. It was a huge part of my practice. Over 29 years I practiced on racehorses. At this time, I'm good. I would stand for questions at any time, but at this time I'd like to turn it over to Representative Seifert.
Yeah, committee, I think we'll take questions at the end of all the testimony and open it up at that time. But thank you for your testimony. Next, I'd welcome Representative Mark Schreiber.
I'm glad finally somebody moved the mic up for me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In committee, I'm Mark Schreiber from the 60th District. You might be kind of wondering why I'm up here testifying on a horse racing bill. Well, over the last 7 years, my wife and I have been partners in racehorses, excuse me. And we've been fans of horse racing for a very long time. In fact, one of the first live races we went to was at Eureka Downs that Representative Droege mentioned, and fell in love with it. And we've been all over the country visiting various racetracks and enjoying the sport. And now we are partners in racehorses. One of the things that people don't realize is that, you know, if you started in Minnesota up by Minneapolis on I-35 and drove south towards Houston, you would run by or close to racetracks in Minnesota, Iowa, Oklahoma City, Dallas, Fort Worth, and down in Houston. You wouldn't see anything in Kansas. It's kind of a racing desert, if you care to say that. Of course, we used to have racing at Woodlands and then Eureka Downs and at Anthony during the fair. But right now, there's no racing. So when I'm driving back and forth to Emporia, it's not uncommon for me to see horse trailers go up and down the turnpike, heading either south to Remington Park in Oklahoma City or north up to either Canterbury Park in Minneapolis or Prairie Meadows in Des Moines. And I sure would like to see those trailers full of horses and hay and workers and so forth stop here in Kansas and be able to race. We own thoroughbred horses, but quarter horses are also important to the industry. There's a story, Dwayne Lucas, I don't know if you've watched the Kentucky Derby much, but back in late 80s and into the 90s, he won 4 different Kentucky Derbies. He's kind of noted because he wears aviator glasses. He's very nattily dressed, so to speak. He's 87 now. And in his autobiography, he mentioned Emporia as a time when he was coming through with his quarter horses. He used to train quarter horses. Now he trains just thoroughbreds. But he was coming through Emporia, and there was a Kansas Futurity on. and he was preparing one of his horses for that, but it was a real skittish horse. We used to have a racetrack at the fairgrounds at Emporia, and the horse was real skittish and would buck, and it wasn't paying attention to what his work was needed. So if you're familiar with Emporia, the fairgrounds is about, 3 blocks from a grade school. The story goes, he went over to the grade school at recess with 50-cent pieces and hired a bunch of kids to come over there and run up and down the grandstands, yelling and screaming and throwing stuff, and to get the horse used to a lot of activity in the race. And he was successful at it. He got the horse calmed down, and I'm not sure exactly how he did in the futurity, but it just so happened last fall, one of our horses was in the paddock next to his, and I just had to ask him if this was a true story. And he's 87, sharp as a tack, and he goes, I said, Mr. Lucas, I'm Mark Schreiber from Emporia, Kansas, and in your autobiography, blah, blah, blah. I said, is that a true story? He goes, oh, yeah. He says, and he knew the name of the horse. He recalled all the different things that went on trying to get that horse ready for the futurity. And, that kind of excitement, that kind of involvement in the community and so forth, it was really fun to hear about, and I wish we could recreate that again. So I'm in support of 2434. As Representative Droege said, it's a rather simple bill to provide revenue that's being generated through the historical racing machines into both the breeding and the development funds for horse racing. The horse racing development fund would, help hopefully regenerate Eureka Downs and maybe other parks. But the breeding operation too needs support as well, because that's really the lifeblood of the whole horse industry is the breeding operation. It's an important part to the thoroughbred industry, especially in Kentucky and New York, Florida, and so forth. And there's no reason why that couldn't be regenerated here in Kansas as well. So I appreciate your consideration with the bill, and I'm in full support of it, and I'll answer questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next conferee is Jeff Rutland with Kansas Quarter Horse Association.
Thank you, Chairman, for hearing us out today. I find myself in somewhat of a familiar position up here testifying, as I've done for probably 15 years, trying to find help for the horse industry, but it doesn't make me any less nervous, so you'll have to excuse me a little bit. But my family has raised horses for the racetrack for over 70 years in Independence. We've actually have a barn that's larger than a football field. And in 1 year's time, we spent over $250,000 on feed and hay alone. Racing is a big business. With the changing times, I've had to change my business model, as most in any industry does. But for racing to modify its business model, it takes legislative change, since we're such a tightly regulated industry. So it's important for you to understand why our industry can no longer sustain itself under the existing structure. Racing still uses the same system that came to America in 1927, the totalizator, the tote board. That holds out a portion of the money that's bet on a parimutuel race to be distributed among the state, the track operator, and the race prize money for the horses, while the bulk of the pool is returned to the bettors. This portion of the handle is the only source of revenue that horse racing has that's injected back into all the other ancillary operations that were mentioned before. So our system worked for years. Even in the mid-'80s, 24% of the gambling dollar in America was bet on parimutuel horse racing. Today, that number is less than 3%. The expansion of gambling has savaged our revenue source and directed it back to the casino gambling. It's time to capture some of this revenue that racing has lost and direct it back to an industry that can direct it across the state, in every county across the state. House Bill 2434 is a tax bill, as Representative Droege has said. It would direct the tax on the money bet on HHR to support live racing. Now, that money is dispersed by the Kansas Racing and Gaming Commission upon their approval as the time goes along. This would allow the fair tracks to open and offer incentives for the farms across the country or across the state of Kansas to reestablish while still attracting out-of-state investors that would come back to Kansas to raise Kansas-bred horses. By distributing this tax money in such a way, the state will see returns more than fivefold by the operation of these horse farms across the state that will pay taxes on land, machinery, trucks, feed, labor, et cetera, et cetera. Casinos cannot say that. This bill would revitalize an agri-industry that once poured well over $100 million annually into our state's economy. We could call this the Revitalization Opportunity Act, perhaps. So it seems like over the past few years that the horses have been used over and over again as an alibi to expand gambling across the state. This HHR facility wouldn't even be possible if not for a 1986 constitutional amendment that allowed parimutuel racing. Heck, one of the lottery games at the local convenience store shows virtual horse racing that you can win money on. The Kansas Expanded Lottery Act was intended to allow a portion of slot revenue to support and help live horse racing, but that didn't work. HHR now uses horse racing as the headline of their gambling machines, while the horse racing industry still receives nothing out of the revenue. Each year, the state will offer huge incentives to attract an industry back to Kansas or into Kansas, one that will do far less for the state overall than just allowing our industry to come back and reestablish. Horse racing will always be a part of our culture in Kansas for young and old alike. I hope you can let this latest expansion of gambling come back and work for all the people of the state. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, I'd like to welcome to committee Stacy Randall. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. My name is Stacy Randall. I'm from Eureka, Kansas, and I'm representing the Greenwood County Fair Association. Yeah, I'm shorter. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. I'm representing the Greenwood County Fair Association as the secretary. As Doc spoke earlier, there's been racing in Kansas since the 1870s. We had a small horse track south of Eureka until the early 1900s. In 1903, the Greenwood County Fair Association took control of the track, and to this day, we still own it and operate it. And when I talk about a fair board or stockholders, you have to realize we are a nonprofit organization, so we are not making any money off of this. We have kept it where other tracks have shut down, sold out. The racetrack is very much still there, used for training still. It is such a big part of Eureka, or was a big part of Eureka, from the tourism to the agricultural aspect. There are still 2 organizations, if this House bill does pass, that are willing to come and operate the facility, since we are the only one left. So mostly, like, for me, it's bringing those horsemen back home. My husband's in Oklahoma right now. He could be spending his money right here. Instead, he's had to go out of state. So it's just a way to bring the horsemen back home, get those agricultural sectors some help, because we always say we want to help the rural economies, and this is, in my opinion, is one way to do that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, I'd like to welcome Justine Statelin. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Justine Staten, Executive Director of the Kansas Horse Council. We are essentially the voice of the equine industry in Kansas. So I'm very passionate about this House Bill 2434 as a potential opportunity to stimulate the live horse racing again. As you've heard, there's a lot of history in it. And not only that, the economic impact opportunities are tremendous. There was a survey back in 1996 that showed at that time there were about 2,130 horses racing in Kansas, and that's of Kansas horses, not to mention horses that would come in from out of state to do these races. Kansas Horse Council did an equine economic impact survey in 2021, and it reflected about 200 horses racing, and they're not racing in Kansas. So the other part of that equine economic impact survey that we measured was the direct and indirect effect on the economy. And we measured currently, without the equine racing, we are looking at about 2,600 jobs that are created in the equine industry, $150 million of all types of income from that, and $280 million of total economic activity. So imagine that impact if we had live racing back in Kansas. It's a boost to the agritourism economy, and it would provide jobs for some of our students that are graduating in equine science and animal sciences, that they could be doing breeding jobs, they could be doing marketing jobs, and lots of different jobs that would impact directly and indirectly on the racing economy. So House Bill 2434 would be a wonderful stimulus for the live racing and Kansas equine industry in general. So there you go. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Committee, that concludes the proponents that I had appearing before the committee. We have several written testimonies. I always want to make sure I appreciate everyone's attendance, and if there's anyone else wishing to appear before the committee as a proponent, I would welcome that at this time. Seeing none, we have no neutral or opposition testimony. Is there anyone either wishing to appear as a neutral or opponent? I guess I jumped ahead of myself. We should go back to questions on the proponents before I go on to that. But at this time, I'll open it up for questions for any of the conferees. Representative Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, my question may be more for research. We didn't really get a fiscal note. I'm just curious how much money we're talking about that the 3% would raise. Okay.
Yeah, we might touch base with, unless somebody wants to take a stab at that.
And I don't have the actual figures. I'm just guessing that looking at what my counterparts in Kentucky have said, that the historical horse racing machines have generated in the billions of dollars worth of revenue. So if we shrink that down, because we're not really operating that just yet, and guesstimate, let's say $324 million of revenue generated, and you do the math on that at 3%, what that would do, that would be my guess.
Okay, Representative Epley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, very much. And I'd ask Dr. Drugge to come back to the mic. Representative Drugge, forgive me. Thank you for being here and giving us this opportunity. I'm a benefactor of Eureka Downs as a youngster, and thought it was a great opportunity and great venue. And I guess what I'd like to know, how soon, I mean, if this would pass and it goes on the books like we hope, when would a season start and what would a season look like? Dr. Drugge, are you able to answer that for us?
The first thing you'd look at is how long it's going to take to get the licensor for the HHR in Wichita, build the facility, start getting generating the income on the facility, and then it would have to accumulate, I would say, a couple of years, 1 to 2 anyway, before you would have a substantial amount of money to deal with to start the racing venue.
Any further questions, committee, for any of the conferees? Representative Corbett.
Will there be any machines at the track once it's up to where they could, if they could gamble on any other machines while you're there? Any slot machines or any other type of gambling available there?
What you're asking, is there going to be other games there besides horse racing?
Right.
No, because as you're aware, the way the rules are written in the state to put a slot machine in that racetrack facility the state would take 40% off the top, where the casinos only pay 22%. That's why the horse racing became unable to support itself, because only on horse racing, they only had horse racing revenue. They couldn't use any other games. So it would only be live horse racing.
Thank you.
Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure who this is for, but who would disperse the money from the funds?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Or who would disperse the money that goes to the funds between like the breeding fund and the horse racing benefit fund?
Let me adjust my hearing aids again and see.
Do we know who disperses the money that goes to these funds?
I'm sorry, I still didn't get that.
Okay, raise okay.
Come on, Jeff. There's enough echo in this room that I don't get it.
The funds have already been established through the Parimutuel Racing Act, and the Kansas Racing and Gaming Commission would oversee all the disbursements of these funds.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further questions, Representative Helgerson.
This is not a question for any of the individuals that testified, but it really raises some questions. The amendment to that bill that was passed last session was at the end of the session, without any discussion, without any debate. And I checked with my colleague to see if Fed and State has had any discussion or debate on this. Sedgwick County is going to, I think there's 2 or 3 different models on this. If this is the committee that needs to take the lead, it needs to then get some briefing and find out a lot of other questions. And I'm not at all opposed to supporting the horse racing industry, but I think that there's several other questions that need to be addressed that either Fed and State or our committee needs to take the lead and have the racing and the lottery come back and answer some questions, not avoid us, but be available for questions and answers.
Yes, I agree with that, because this seems like a fairly simple bill, but it's a very complex issue, and we would want to make sure we do our due diligence before we would ever move forward on this bill. Make sure we understand any unintended consequences or potential litigation or different things like that could evolve. Representative Hoffman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was going to ask sort of the same thing, except that, under that provision, we already have it right now where the state gets a certain amount of the money. And so I think, what Representative Helgerson is saying is, I think it needs to be relooked at, as far as once the state gets the money, maybe where some of that goes. And it's possible that when you add the historical horse racing into the mix, along with the online gaming, that you could probably almost accomplish the same thing without adding another tax. It's possible you could use some of the revenue that we're going to generate from that's going to other things that might be able to be used for this. So just bring that up to as something to maybe look at.
Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not real sure who this is for, but on the historical horse racing gaming machines that we've been talking about, we've already accepted 3 applications for that. Would that mean we'd have to reopen that up under these new provisions? Obviously, this would be some sort of tax or maybe some less revenue for the companies that have put in applications. Would that affect that at all at this point?
I'm not sure, but I'll turn to Representative Sawyer on that.
The way I understand, right now, we have that 3% tax on this. And that money is supposed to go to right now, it goes to the Racing and Gaming Commission for their regulations. I mean, that's under current law. Instead, under this bill, it would change it. So the third would go to to one fund, and the 2/3 would go to the other fund. So it would go to this operation instead of going to the Racing and Gaming Commission. So we're not adding a new tax. we're just diverting kind of what we're doing now. And my assumption is the Racing Gaming Commission is getting enough revenue from the current sources that they probably don't need this revenue for regulation. And well, the way it works now, any revenue they get that they don't need for their operations goes to the state general fund. So essentially what we'd be doing, whatever this raises, we'd be diverting money that would normally be going to the state general fund to these funds. Does that make sense?
May I add?
That's the way I understand it.
May I add something to that? That I know there's discussion and some fear that we're opening up a gaming bill. Yes, the Parimutuel Racing Act is a part of this that the state has always received between up from 3 to 6% of the parimutuel handle. So I want to make it clear, we're not opening up more gambling. The gambling was already done. As the representative spoke of last year, this HHR bill, which we didn't have any part of, we didn't think it was going to pass. It was passed with what we understand is very poor language for everyone, especially the horse people. Here again, you're right in our shirt tails. You've allowed another gambling facility, but we still get nothing out of it. The state gets nothing out of it, but tax. We want the rural people to get something out of this. So we're not asking for more gaming. The gaming door is shut. This is not going to breach any contracts with the state, with what they've had already with the casino operators. What I see, Boyd Gaming even, they filed a lawsuit in district court. The HHR statute says any discrepancies or lawsuits will go straight to the Supreme Court. Now here they've got an application in to operate the machines in Sedgwick County. And to make sure that we're clear, there will be no machines in Eureka. The machines can only be, these HHR machines can only be in Sedgwick County. So all we're asking is to open the door, allow horse racing to come back, and you guys sit there with your fishing pole and reel in the money. I mean, we've got over $100 million that we put into the economy every single year from the farm operations. One horse goes to the racetrack, there's 8 others in production or being bred, money spent on all kinds of things back at the farm for that one horse that gets here. So, and to address Ms. Staten's comment that at one time we had over 2,000 Kansas bred horses, now we've only got 200. The racing industry, it's very important to have a state bred program where you run against state breds in your pool of competition. Now I have to take my horses and run in against the California bred, the Oklahoma, Texas bred horses. We're asking for the ability to come back and when people say, gosh, that horse that Rutland had, a Kansas bred horse, he just made $5,000 just because he's a Kansas bred. So that's what we're asking. And it's a complicated system, I know, but it will pay the state huge dividends.
Thank you for that. Committee, are there any further questions? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2434. And that does conclude our business for the day. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your participation, and we are adjourned.